So, do you remember middle school? I mean, if you're from up north, maybe it was junior high, depending on where you're from. 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, around that time. Oh, man. What a time for me. I'll tell you. Because I went to the best, worst middle school ever. Because there was no academic requirements of any kind. I mean, when it was Parents' Day, we would bring out the educational toys and stuff. But the teachers and the kids knew that that all went away. Nobody blew our cover because we knew that if the parents found out we weren't learning anything, we'd have to do actual work. So it was a great conspiracy. It was awesome. And it was run by some refugees from the 60s, and so there was a lot of, we talked about our feelings a lot. We sang a lot of Peter, Paul, and Mary in the morning. It was like the Lord of the Flies with patchouli oil. It was just, oh my God. It was one of those things where there were no requirements of any kind. And I'm not joking. I happened to read because I liked reading, but no one was making me read. So I just kind of, by the time I got to 8th grade, I was 13. By the time I got to 8th grade, I had really figured out how to work the system. I figured out how to use a computer, and I was making video games and selling them to the other kids. Seriously. I skateboarded a lot during recess, and then when there wasn't recess, I was still in the parking lot. We just goofed around all the time. And like I said, by 8th grade, I was running the thing. It was great. I was making the most of it. I loved it. I knew all the words if I had a hammer. It was great. But I started to realize that this school only went up to 8th grade. And I was going to have to go to a real school soon. And the only thing I knew about high school is what I had learned from John Hughes movies, and they're not nice to the nerdy kid in those movies. And I started to freak out a little bit. I started to get scared a little bit. I had no idea about anything particularly academic except accidental. And I started to really freak out that I wasn't learning anything. You know, a lot of times people talk about a moment of silence in school. I was hoping for a moment of science in school. I really was scared. And so I came up with a plan. Around the springtime of my 8th grade year, I started reading. I just got every kind of book I could get. I got every kind of study prep manual I could get my hands on. I did everything I could think to do to get ready to go to real school because I was convinced that there was no way that I could compete academically, that I was going to be in big trouble. And so that whole, after I got done with 8th grade, that whole summer was like a training montage, except instead of push-ups, I was reading books. I was just doing everything I could to try and just get there because I was convinced I was going to be in a lot of trouble. And I studied, and I studied, and I studied, and I studied. And by the time summer was almost over, I still didn't really have a good sense of what was going to happen to me. And I found out that at the local junior college, St. Pete Junior College, you could take a placement test. And I knew I wasn't going to pass the test. That wasn't the goal. There's no way I'm going to pass the test, but I knew that they would tell me what level I was at in reading, writing, arithmetic, whatever. And so at least I would know where I was going to be okay and where I was going to get clobbered, right? So I begged my parents to let me take the test, and I took the placement test. 13-year-old kid in with all of these adults. And after I took the test and waited for my results, the results came back and they said, "Welcome to college." Wow. So at the ripe old age of 13, I started college. Now, it's not glamorous. First of all, this is not Harvard. This is St. Pete Junior College. The bar is lower. There were ashtrays in the classrooms. It's okay. But the other thing is that, it's not like I was getting invited to parties. And I still had a lot of figuring out to do because, as it turns out, in college, no one is interested in hearing about my feelings. I could sing every song from Woodstock, and I could tell you, my stomach hurts, and I'm pretty sure my parents are malignant narcissists, and I don't know what to do about it, and no one cared. And so I was still trying to figure stuff out, and I was doing okay, but I wasn't doing great, and I certainly wasn't having the kind of fun I was used to having in school. But I found out that there was a class called College Survival. And I felt like I needed that. College Survival. And it was a 1-credit class. I thought maybe an easy A, and I wasn't surviving, so here we go. And I took the class, and it was a lot of things that you would expect. There was a lot of things about here's how to take a test, here's what to do to pay attention, and here's how to navigate the system of the school, right? That kind of thing. And, no big surprises there. But there were 2 things that I got in college survival that stuck with me, that I use even now. And one of the things was, you should take subjects that you're interested in. That sounds like a no-brainer, right? But you know what? Most people don't know that. They do a lot of what they think they have to do. But the idea was, take a subject that you're interested in, even if it's harder. So, for example, growing up in Florida, I had some exposure to the Spanish language. I had bilingual friends. I was around it. Certainly not an expert, but I can kind of make some sense of some things in Spanish and kind of figure some things out. So it makes sense. Well, if you have to take a language in school, take Spanish. You got a leg up. But the idea of this is, if you're interested and excited about taking Russian or Japanese, you should do that. Studies indicate that you will get better grades even if it's harder if you're excited about it. Isn't that interesting? That is a life lesson. Do the thing that you're excited about, and the numbers are there. You will flourish in it even if it seems harder. Isn't that interesting in a culture that tells us to take the easy thing because it might be profitable? But we'll get back to that. The other thing that I learned that I still think about and still applies to life today is lean in. Lean in. Like literally, lean in. In the class, I learned that your body language, the way that you carry yourself, actually influences your experience of things. So, for example, the class said, sit in the front row. Make eye contact with your instructors. Don't cross your arms. Make sure your body looks like you care. And that seems so silly. But I tried it. And it works. I started to do better in my classes just by leaning in, just by paying attention, just by being present, just by going, you know what, this is a boring lecture, but I'm going to make sure that my body doesn't say that I'm bored. And all of a sudden, this crazy thing happened that I had not been exposed to before. I learned things. It was very exciting. And I have to tell you that, I grew up, I'm a Unity kid. I grew up in New Thought. And so the thing that I knew from being a kid, being young, one of the things that I had been taught from the beginning is, if you don't like your life, change your mind. Thoughts held in mind reproduce after their kind. What we think about is what we experience in our lives, and on and on. We know all of those quotes, right? That kind of thing. And so my understanding of that was that my job is to figure everything out. Have it all in here, all between my ears, and then move forward, right? That's how I thought life worked, and I was pretty good at that kind of living. But here's this thing that's really working for me that has everything to do with change your body, change the outer stuff, and you'll get something on the inside that's different. It blew my mind, and I got to tell you, at that point in my life, it was the thing that worked the best in my life. Wow. And I found out that it didn't just apply to school. It applied to job interviews, and it applied to dating, and it applied to, later on, it applied to how I would talk to my kids. Not that I was bored talking to my kids, but that it was important to me for them to know that I was interested in every way that I could let them know I was interested. It applied to every part of my life. You want a different experience of your life? Lean in. Make sure you mirror what you want to be true. Not after you figured it out, but until you do, you'll never get an experience. Leaning in invites experience, and it is something that has applied to every area of my life on an ongoing basis. And I have to say that that's interesting too, that this is something that never stops. But real life is like that. There is no part of real life that ever is done. Not really. Can you imagine saying to your romantic partner, well, I've loved you and I'm done now? Can you imagine saying to your children, I'm done caring for you. I did it. Achievement unlocked. I'm done now. Look, guys, you know that I'm a grandparent, but I'm still a daddy, and the daddy stuff still is there. It never goes away. Can you imagine being done caring or loving or learning or growing? Nothing good, nothing important, nothing real is ever done. And maybe I can say that differently. If it can be done, it's probably not the truth about who you are. And if you think about the natural world, the Discovery Channel kind of experience, the real world is just an ongoing wheel of experience. There's always something new. Life is about explosive, radiating growth. There's always something new and exciting happening. Nothing is ever done. Nothing on the outside, nothing on the inside, nothing above, nothing below is ever really done. Nothing important is ever really done. And we know that intuitively, we know that experientially, and yet we are taught over and over again, you want to be successful, get done with a lot of stuff. What have you achieved? What have you crossed off your list? What are you finished with? Get it figured out, get it put away, get it done. That's what we are trained for. And I'm pretty good at that. I've received that same cultural training that we all have. I have achieved things. I have crossed things off of so many lists. But when I think about it, and I invite you to think about it too, I can't think of a single time that getting stuff put away, crossed off the list, put in a box, done, I can't think of a single time that exercise has ever made me happy. Because it is the opposite of life. Now, not to be too dramatic here, but we can phrase it in a question. Are you on the side of life or are you on the side of death? Stick with me. Death puts things in boxes, usually pine. Puts things away, sorts them out, closes them off, puts them in cubbies. Life, as we've learned, just continues. It gets bigger and bigger. It goes on. So if you want more life in your life, stop stopping. That's a heck of a sentence right there. If you want more life in your life, stop stopping. Stop trying to put things away. Start letting them be open at the top. That sounds familiar. Let me put that differently. Given the awesome nature of life, given the outrageous miracle of every moment and every atom and every experience and every feeling, given the bigness of all of this, what is it exactly that you're going to figure out and own intellectually? Because in the process of figuring it out, we lose the thing that is beautiful about it. A painting is more than the oils in the canvas. A song is more than the notes. Love is more than chemistry. You can't fit this between your ears. And in the act of trying, you lose what is important. So ask yourself, what does your best self do? Because you get a choice. People talk about what would your hero do? What would Jesus do? What would this person do? That's awesome. But let's start where we are. The best version of you, the kind of person that you have been, that you would like to be again, does the best version of you sit back and not do anything until they got it all figured out and they're comfortable? Or does the best version of you jump in? You get to decide who you want to be. And a lot of that has to do with, what's the goal? What does it look like when we did it right? There's so much pressure to do it right. And what I have learned through all of this being around for as long as I have, through being a minister, through being a dad, through being a lot of different weird things, what I have learned is that there is a very big difference between perfect and it went according to my plan. This is important, so I'm going to say it again. There is a big difference between perfect and it went according to my plan. And what I have learned is the more that I understand that difference, the happier I am. And on the other hand, the less I remember that difference, the more I think that it's got to go my way, the less fun I am to be around. And I bet you have the same experience. You get to decide that. But let me put that another way. If there is limitation in my life, if there is lack, if there is a problem, if there is a shortfall, if there is a hole somewhere, if there is limitation in my life, where did that come from? Does God even see in terms of limitation? This isn't about blame. We're all growing. But God doesn't see that, so who put that there? In the process of me trying to figure it out, I make it smaller and I put walls around it. So I'll say it again. Given the awesomeness of life, given the outrageous miracle of every atom and every moment and every experience and everything about life, what constitutes normal or acceptable or comprehensible or figure-outable, if you want? What constitutes that? Let's get better, sidebar, let's get better at not judging other people because life is just too darn big. What constitutes okay, acceptable, given how big the whole thing is? And actually, who cares? Let's get better at setting that aside. There is so much pressure to think outside the box. Well, it's my box. I'm the one that made the thing. I'm the one that put walls around it in the first place. God doesn't do that. The act of figuring or trying to figure the thing out is what makes it small in the first place. And what I have learned is that for this spirituality thing to work, it's got to be more than my comfort zone. Ask yourself, is your spiritual practice about making sure that you're comfortable with everything? Well, I can handle this thing because I read a book about what people like you are like. Is it a complicated way of putting things in cubby holes, of putting things away? Because again, not to be too dramatic, but that's death. And it is not what we're here for. If your spiritual practice is just to make you comfortable, it's not all that spiritual because, just to use one example, love is incredibly inconvenient. And you know that. If it's good, it pulls you out of your comfort zone. If it's real, it forces you to grow because life forces you to grow, right? So, for this to work, this spirituality thing, this God stuff thing, this love thing, this growing up thing, whatever you want to call the thing, it's got to be less about how and more about that. I don't need to know how God works. That is not my job. And if I try to break down a miracle into its component parts, I lose the miraculousness of it. My job is not to know how God works. It's God's job. My job is to know that God works. My job is not to know how God works. My job is to know that God works. Faith is not about knowing how God works because at that point it's not faith anymore. Faith is knowing that God works. What areas of your life can you back off of the how and lean into the that? Because there are parts of this, because of the bigness of life, because of the outrageous miracle of life, there are parts of this that we just can't see because it's not our job to see it. And in trying to see it, we reduce it, you know? One of my favorite spiritual thinkers, who also happens to be one of my favorite stand-up comedians, is a guy named Pete Holmes. And Pete Holmes says it like this. He says, the characters in a book cannot see the author. They can't. It's not what they're here for. The characters in a book cannot see the author, no matter what they do. Even if the author wrote a character named the author, that's not the author. Even if the characters in a book decide that one of the other characters is the author, or somehow more close to the author, that ain't the author. The characters in a book can't see the author. It's not what they're there for. Their job is just to be the characters in the book. And to go a little bit further than what he said, we might point out that it's really interesting because the author is throughout the book. That whole book, every character, every moment, every person and place and thing is an outpicturing of that author. It all comes from the author's imagination and time and work and all of that. The author is in and through everything. The author is immanent. But the characters in the book cannot see the author. That's not what they're there for. Is your spiritual practice an effort to try to see how all of this works, to look behind the curtain and see the mechanism, to see the author? Because you can't. Your job is not to know how. Your job is to know that. So instead of trying to figure this out, I might ask you to practice gratitude, to practice awe. Do you practice awe? Can you find things where you go, aw? No, can you find things that are just too big? Sometimes when I do prayer treatment with people who are really sad, really depressed, really that kind of thing, one of the things that I will often tell people is get yourself into the presence of infinity. In other words, go to the beach and look at the ocean. Go to the mountains. Do something that gets you in the concept of infinity, and you can start to realize that this is all so big, and we can start to work down whatever it is that's bothering you, and we can get to the other side. Get yourself in the presence of infinity. Practice awe. There's a great poem where in it the poet says, people can't be mean if they practice awe. Have you ever known anything to bite when their jaw is dropped? Which is pretty good. Find something that is amazing and awesome. You used to be good at this. You're good at this now. Everybody's got stories like this. I don't think that this is particularly exceptional, but my kids had amazing stories that they would tell when they were little about something bigger. My daughter used to say, when I was big like you, and she would tell these incredible stories about what she used to do. She used to drive trucks, and I used to do this, and I lived in this different place, and she would tell these stories of when I was big like you, before I was here this time. Now, I'm not doing a lesson about that right now. I'm not prepared to talk about that right now. That's not what I'm here for today. We can talk about that some other time. But the point is, this is not exceptional. My son had similar things that he would talk about. Everybody who's been around kids has heard stories like that that cannot be explained, that are about something bigger, some kind of other experience, some kind of a concept of the bigness. Everyone who's been around a kid has heard something like that. It is universal. Google is your friend if you don't believe me. And maybe there are ways to experience and explain some of that, but not all of it. And people say, well, you just age out of it over time because you're further away from the bigness or whatever. And I don't believe that because God is here. I don't think that's why. I think that when people become adults, they can forget about that closeness and about that bigness because kids are used to things not making sense. Kids don't have to figure it all out. Where are we going now? We go to the movies, we go to school, we go to the mall. Should I put my shoes on? Do I not? Whatever. They don't need to know everything. They don't need the constant explanation and justification and validation that most adults require to do anything. Kids are just kids. They're just playing at it. You want to be a bigger person, remember what it was like to be small. Because at the end of all of this, what we realize is that we don't have to know how this works. We just have to know that it works. In order to be perfect, the universe does not require our evaluation. It requires our participation. In order to be perfect, the universe does not require our evaluation. It just requires our participation. And so just like in college survival, take the subject that you're interested in, even if it seems hard. There is something that you want to do. There is something that is calling to you. And I promise there is never going to be a time where everything is okay to do that. There's never going to be enough money. There's never going to be enough permission. There's never going to be enough validation because it don't work that way. Just lean in. the thing that you ache to do, there is some version of it that you can do without anybody's permission, without another dime in your bank account. Go do that. Go participate in it. Go lean in. Because you have the right to be happy. And you have the right to be fulfilled. And you have the right to be healed. If you want more life in your life, go live your life. Because you have a right to be free. Because after all, freedom is a choice.